Alex, on one of the shows you did with me previously, you were talking about the military-industrial complex, and you were talking about why the West is always at war. And I want to refresh your memory. This is on point to everything that you just talked about and everything that is going on. So I'm going to play this. It's a few minutes of you giving everybody a description of what is actually going on. I thought it was one of the most pertinent analysis of the entire situation of why there's always a common need for war or military bases around the world. So I'm going to bring this up on the screen, and I just want you to listen to this. You were on point, man. I mean, you were on point. Here it is. Here.
Hi, and for any ordinary person and ordinary business in the country, and I'm not in the United States, but the same principle applies everywhere. We could all get along really well, trade with one another, because there's stuff I would like to buy from American businesses. And there is stuff that American people would like to buy from, France, Croatia, China, wherever. And in that case, we could simply live in peace and trade with each other. And, if somebody spent too much and produced too little, their currency would get punished, their credit rating would get punished, exporting countries would be hesitant to, export their goods to them because they would worry about getting paid and so forth. And then that
but I paused there for a second. This is the first time this act like this, Alex. I mean, I've played this clip on the show multiple times. It hasn't buffered, it hasn't paused in it, and all of a sudden that you're on the show again and I'm playing your clip, it's buffering and pausing again. This is unreal. But I'm going to take it off and I'm going to finish it up and see if it'll make it through, because you were really chopping up the situation, and you gave a lot of people an insight of American and Western military moves and why it's connected to the economy. I hope everything goes good and it plays better. Here it is.
Belt and improve their production or reduce their imports and basic economic policy. The problem is that what you and I think about these things and the way you and I would deal with these problems is not the same when it comes to the imperial factions, which are basically the very narrow networks of powers that are clustered around the global banking cartel and the mega corporations that have grown up around them. Now, banking and empire usually go together, particularly the kind of banking and the kind of monetary system that we have in place today. And I'll try to explain in as simple terms as I can think of it. Basically, today's monetary system is, we have fiat currencies backed by nothing other than, trust and confidence. And we have fractional reserve banking, okay? All the money that goes into circulation represents debt. If there were no debt in the system, there would be no money in the system, zero, not a single dollar. And so for any money to be in circulation, somebody has to go into debt. Debt becomes assets on the books of the banks. So the banks, your debt is banks' assets. Your liability, right? That's the bank's assets. Now, given that the debt has to be paid back with interest, but only the principal goes into circulation, the whole system functions like a large Ponzi scheme, because the only way that you can pay your debt plus interest is to earn it from other people who have to go into debt for whatever reason, for consumption, for mortgages, for business development, for infrastructure development, whatever. But people have to keep going into debt, and the system is only stable for as long as it grows. So that's why we have this imperative of always growing the economy, the GDP growth. Even when everybody's satisfied, everybody has everything they need, and maybe they only need to make minor purchases, there's always this imperative for the whole system to grow so that people go more into debt and buy more crap so that more crap can be produced. And the government has to keep going deeper and deeper into debt. That's symptomatic. That's across the world, every government, every nation that has this monetary system in place. And that's pretty much all nations in the world today. Now, what happens is that at a certain point, the system is saturated, right? Everybody maxes out on debt. You don't need more stuff. You don't need to go into debt to buy more stuff. And at that point, the system would begin to implode on itself because it's no longer growing. And at that point, what you need is to expand basically by taking other nations' resources as collateral. Because remember also, you can only grow the credit cycle for as long as you can keep adding healthy money, good collateral into the system. And once everybody's maxed out domestically, there's no further collateral that can be added to keep the system going. Or, maybe it's not enough, maybe it's too marginal. And at that point, if the Middle Eastern countries have plenty of oil, well, why not turn that oil into our collateral, and then our corporations can get into debt with our banks against that oil as collateral. Ditto for GMO crops. Ditto for gold mines, silver mines, coffee, cocoa plantations everywhere. So this banking system creates an incentive for nations that embrace it to become empires. Now, it's not a given that it has to be military expansionism, because in other nations, for example, I grew up in the communist Yugoslavia, same money system, same thing. The government was spending on big monuments, giving people high salaries, employing everybody. And the effect was the same. The system was unsustainable. But in the West, particularly Great Britain and the United States, the system has tended to go towards military interventionism and the expansion of empire. And this is what the United States has adopted from its predecessor, which is the British Empire, which, once it began to collapse at the turn of last century, at the turn of the 20th century, 100 years ago or so, the British establishment simply decided to transfer its seat of power to Washington and New York to infiltrate and co-opt the democratic system of governance on the United States, and to help themselves to the wealth and military and diplomatic and political power of the United States to continue expanding their empire and to take all other nations' resources as collateral and to use all other nations' populations as a source of cheap labor. And that's where we're at today. So that's why for them, this logic of let's all get along and trade with each other, for them that doesn't work. They want other nations' collateral so that their money system can keep from imploding.
Boom. I thought that was one of the best analysis of what's going on with the system, especially when you talked about how the British co-opted the U.S. government and a lot of the policies that the Americans think are U.S. policies are really British imperial policies, and how under that British mind state that the United States is always driven towards to take other people's resources. Could you give me your thought on your perspective that we just showed?
Well, I would agree. I would agree with myself, and very happy to know that I've grown younger since I made that statement, and maybe even slightly better looking. but yeah, I think that this is our principal problem. The problem of imperialism, colonialism, and an oligarchic system of governance. And basically, this is exactly where it's at. If you go back to May 2021, Davos, Switzerland, George Soros held his annual address to the gathering of these good and great people, and he said that the conflict we are looking at in the world, and the war between Russia and Ukraine didn't start yet, but it was gathering. The conflict that we are observing in the world is the conflict between the two systems of governance. And in that, he was exactly on point. George Soros said it's open societies versus closed societies. And if you listen to other, American officials, NATO officials, British officials, they will say, oh, it's between Western style liberal democracies and Eastern dictatorships, tyrannies, autocracies, and blah blah blah, all of this stuff. But the actual conflict is between the Western oligarchic system and the rest of the world. And by that, I don't mean just the rest of the world, other nations. It's the American people as well, the British people as well, the French people as well, because these people are waging war abroad against other nations that they're colonizing, but also at home against their own populations. And it's been that way since more than 2,000 years, since Greek antiquity, Roman Empire, European colonial powers, Spain, France, Belgium, Portugal, Holland, Britain. It's always been the same thing. And today, that same parasite has infiltrated the United States. And so I think what we need to understand is, because, if you took history 101, 102, whatever, you always study history and it gives you the impression that empires are somehow national things, because it's a thing of a nation that just turns itself into an empire. The Spanish Empire and the British Empire and the French Empire, and today everybody's talking about the American Empire. Empires are not national things. The nations merely play host to this oligarchic parasite that co-opts its structures of governance, its governments, its militaries, its diplomatic corps, its intelligence agencies, its economic power, banking, finance. And then they use this to expand their sphere of influence and to colonize other nations, and also to oppress the people at home. It's very obvious, ever since the British Empire infected the body politic of the United States has become the guardian of the empire, with 1,000 military bases around the world, whatever the number is. Are the American people better off for it? It doesn't look like it. Look at the American cities. Phoenix, Chicago, the Skid Row, San Francisco, Oakland, Philadelphia, you name it. It's all falling down. You could see the same thing in British cities during the heyday of the British Empire in the Victorian era. It's always the same. Venice was the same. Rome was the same. Rome, the things that are left over today are beautiful monuments that were built to last. But the rest was basically Rome was encircled by slums. Most of the people lived in slums in horrible conditions. We don't see that today anymore. The trace of that is erased. and we get this really nice sanitized version of history. But the empire is always mayhem abroad, misery at home. And I think there's no doubt that its origin, if you trace the system of incentives that are driving these behaviors, you invariably come to the banking oligarchies, to the money lenders, because they are the only ones in society that have this incentives. They're not visible, so their role is kind of obscure. The visible hand of the empire are maybe the military organizations and the corporations. When BP and Exxon and Shell go to the Middle East and they extract the oil, and when the mining corporations go around Africa and wherever, you see them. You can write stories in the media about the abuse, about the exploitation of labor, about the suppression of labor movements and so on. That's all there. But these corporations could have a very different set of incentives than the banking system, because a corporation, let's take BP, let's say Exxon, to develop an oil field in, I don't know, let's say Nigeria, they need money. So they have to go to maybe JP Morgan, HSBC, to Goldman Sachs, and they need to maybe raise, I don't know, $500 million. And so that becomes a brand new asset on JP Morgan's books, conjured out of thin air, right? But earning interest revenues for the shareholders, bondholders, and the executives. ExxonMobil doesn't care where $500 million comes from. If they get the loan from the Chinese bank or from a Russian bank, same difference, right? They don't care. Also, ExxonMobil can just as easily buy the Nigerian oil from a Nigerian company that developed and extracted that oil locally, maybe with a loan from a Nigerian bank. And then Exxon could just, ship that oil over to the United States, to Western Europe, add their margin on top, and have a thriving business still, regardless. The only people who get zilch are the bankers. If a Chinese or a Russian bank or a Nigerian bank finances the development of these fields and the trade. So the banking, the multinational banks, the too big to fails, the GSIBs, global systemically important banks, they are the only ones for whom controlling this collateral by force is the do or die proposition, all or nothing. Either they do control it and they turn it into their own source of wealth, or they have nothing. ExxonMobil could still do business with Nigerian banks, with Russian banks, with Chinese banks, with whatever banks. They don't care. Or buy oil from Nigerian companies that are extracted, or Saudi, or wherever. It doesn't matter. So that's where it's at. It's always the money lending oligarchies that co-opt the politicians, control the militaries, the security systems, the spy networks, the diplomatic corps, and they go after the resource wealth and the collateral. And you see, once you know what to pay attention to, you will see it all the time. We just had Lindsey Graham the other day talking about Ukraine, right? He goes like, Ukraine has between 10 and 12 trillion dollars of critical minerals, and we can't give this to Putin. Mr. Graham, it's not yours to give to anybody. But it just kind of tells you, Lindsey Graham didn't think this up. Lindsey Graham is briefed on what his priorities are by his donors.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet you, if you look at the list of his donors, you're going to find Citigroup, you're going to find JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, people like that, or you're going to find organizations that are funded by these very same banks. And this happens all the time. The Chilcot inquiry about the role of Great Britain in the 2003 invasion of Iraq found that 6 months after the invasion, JP Morgan led a consortium of banks that lent $2.5 billion to Iraq to, help their economy. But that loan was secured by Iraqi oil experts. Again, a roundabout way of putting your claws on those oil experts and turning that into a source of, money flows to yourselves from that country. But that could only be possible if the United States military controls Iraq and takes control of Iraqi politics, because, otherwise you wouldn't get that contract.